What is up, you spooky bitches? We are back with another episode of the Hello Sidney podcast here, a podcast for horror lovers where we discuss any and all things horror. And it's me, your girl, Sidney. Happy fucking Halloween, everybody. Happy Friday. Happy last day of October. And we have to wait a year to do it all again. But it's okay because tonight is Halloween, All Hallows Eve, the day we have all been waiting for. I'm filming this on Thursday before, so it sounds weird for me to say that, but I'm dressing as Carrie White tomorrow. Our goddess, our angel, our queen, our baby girl, Carrietta White. And I can't wait to do it, and I can't wait to share it with everybody. I hope it comes out good because I'm literally just like taking a bucket of blood and like dumping it over my head. Like I'm seeing people do Carrie, like the costume on TikTok, and they're like intricately like dripping blood in the proper places on the dress, and people are like bedazzling it. I'm like, I'm just fucking going for it. I'm just like raw dogging it, just right on the head. But we'll see how that goes tomorrow, or I guess tonight if you guys are listening to this on Halloween day. But we are ending Halloween and our lovely Halloween month where we have had 10 whole episodes. We are ending the month with a movie that I personally really enjoy. And this one was kind of divided when it came out a couple of years ago, but I'm talking about Late Night with the Devil from 2023. And we did Ghost Watch earlier this month, and during that episode I said like that movie walked so that Late Night with the Devil could run. And I will say Ghost Watch definitely had the leg up in that people watched it actually thinking it was true, actually thinking it was real life, whereas of course Late Night with the Devil, that was a very like kind of more mainstream movie. Like it was released in theaters, Shudder took it on. David Dastmalchian is the main character. He's a very recognizable actor, and he's also great, by the way. I love him, and he's what makes this movie really enjoyable for me, so shout out to David. But still, the premise of this movie was heavily based on the premise of Ghost Watch, in that this TV studio or this TV show, this host specifically wants to do something to improve his rating. So what better to do that than perform an exorcism on live TV on Halloween? So with that, let's get into Late Night with the Devil. So again, this movie came out in 2023. It's about an hour and 35 minutes long. It has a 7 on IMDb and a 97% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is very damn good for a horror movie. And honestly, I was kind of shocked to see those ratings because even though I did very much enjoy this movie, I didn't expect that the critics necessarily would as well. Like this is one of those movies I'm kind of shocked to see that, but good for it. Live it up. So this movie opens, and it's one of those movies where like it starts showing all the production companies, and by the time you get to like 3 or 4, you're like, what the fuck is happening here? Like, you know that Family Guy skit where they go to the movie theater and they sit down and there's like 7 different openings and like title cards for the different production companies, and like they think like, oh, this is the movie, it's starting, but it's just another title card. So it keeps going on, and by like the 5th or 6th one, you know that something's up. You're like, this isn't possible. And like the 5th or 6th one, it's a joking one. It says like a company, and then it says since 2068. So it's just like jokingly putting all these things in front. We then cut to the actual movie, and we see an old TV set on this soundstage, and the thing turns to static, and eventually it cuts to a picture. And this picture is all of like real footage of like violence in the streets in the 70s. So it's 70s. So like all these protests, war, like all these issues that they had in the 70s. And we hear a narrator start to explain how in the 70s, it was a time of unrest and distrust, and the TVs were showing fear and violence, and the footage is going on as we're seeing this. But he says the TV also offers comfort. And on April 4th, 1971, Night Owls premiered on air with its host Jack Delroy. And of course, this is David Dastmalchian, our main character. And Jack comes out as we're hearing this, and he starts his show, and he thanks his parents, he cracks jokes, the audience is getting a kick out of it. So the narrator continues on and explains that Jack's show, Night Owls, captured the hearts of midnight America. It was an immediate hit, and we kind of see clips of the show throughout the years. But then we get to November 1972, and Jack signs a 5-year deal with Walker Bedford, who is the TV company owner. And after that, he got an Emmy nomination, and he has a growing fan base. We see him on a magazine cover. He had this wife, Madeline, who was a successful actress. They were like the best couple in showbiz, some people said. And she wasn't his only source of support, however, because Jack's association with the Grove was always a source of rumor. So basically, the narrator explains that the Grove is in the Redwoods in California, and it's a men's-only club established in the 1800s, and there's very elite members, politicians, entertainers, and it's basically thought to be a summer camp for the rich and powerful. But there's been speculation regarding some arcane ceremonies that happen at the Grove, but its power to make or break careers. Now, of course, this is based on Bohemian Grove, which is indeed a very real life thing. And there's a lot of prominent people that are members of Bohemian Grove. And it's literally a club in the middle of the woods. If you look it up, you'll see it. Their mascot is this like giant wooden owl in the middle of the redwood trees in California. And people have had conspiracy theories and speculated about it for years because what the fuck are all these rich, powerful men going to do in the middle of the woods? I'm going to let you use your imagination, but as somebody who can very much be a conspiracy theorist, I'm going to say nothing innocent. They're not just fucking playing checkers out there, I don't think, but... So the narrator goes on to explain how, cut to later, we have 4 seasons of Night Owls, but despite its success, he's still failing to beat Carson's ratings. Like, that's what this is all centered about, is that Jack Delroy wants to beat Johnny Carson's ratings. And he's had all these nominations for awards, but no wins. And he seems to be kind of fading. Like, Jack is fading. And then on top of that, in September of 1976, his wife is diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, despite the fact that she's a non-smoker. And then the narrator explains how October of that year, she makes an appearance on the show. And we cut to that appearance and we see that she's sick. She's bald. She has like a handkerchief on her head. She's in a wheelchair. She's got a not gas mask, but like an oxygen mask on. And she tells the story about how her and Jack first met. It's like a really heartfelt moment. And the narrator explains that that is the highest rated episode to date, but it's still a point short of Carson. So even that couldn't beat Johnny Carson. And 2 weeks after that episode aired, Madeline died. So Jack lost his wife. And after that, we see some paparazzi pictures of Jack on the street. And the narrator explains how Jack kind of went into hiding after that and he fled. And eventually 1 month later, he did announce his return. And we see him coming back to the show. So he comes back and does his first episode. The audience cheers for him. And the narrator explains how the gap between him and Carson started to grow even bigger. So the ratings are getting even worse. Ratings are going down, and we start to see how absurd the show gets in an attempt to get better ratings. So like at one point we see Jack like arm wrestling a little person. We see this crazy like drunk woman on stage yelling at him. Like he's trying to do anything he can to get people to watch this damn show so he could beat Johnny Carson. But the narrator then explains that it's not working. Like the ratings are in free fall and Jack's contract is set to expire. But on the night of Halloween 1977, Jack plans an episode that he hopes will turn everything around. And what you are about to see is a previously lost tape about what went on that night. And it's the live TV event that shocked the nation. This is Late Night with the Devil. And we get a title card and we see that it's 10/31/1977. So Halloween night 1977. And this is where the story begins. And we get the opening of Night Owls. It's upbeat, there's music playing, it's cute, and it explains that Jack Delroy is on a spooky Halloween special tonight. And joining us is Chris Stew, Carmichael Haig, and Dr. June Ross Mitchell with the subject of her new book, Lily. So that's the guest that we're getting tonight. So Jack Delroy comes out, or at least he's introduced by Gus, who is his like stagehand, his assistant, his whatever you want to call it, his right-hand man. So he's announced by Gus and like the doors open and Jack doesn't come out. So Gus is like all confused and he's like, Jack? Like, where's Jack? And suddenly Jack like stands up slowly behind him with a ghost thing on, like a sheet over him, and he startles Gus. So that starts off the show. Everybody's laughing. And Jack introduces the episode, and it starts off pretty slow. He introduces what's going to happen, and he talks about baseball for a minute and like President Carter's recent announcements. Like he does current events for a second, and then he tells everybody, I hope you love what we have in store today because it's sweeps week. And it's basically, that means that it's the national ratings period, and he thanks the viewers for sticking by him for all this time and for their support. And that's what brought him back a year ago after his wife. Like if it wasn't for them, he wouldn't shouldn't be here, pretty much. And he seems pretty sincere in that. So Jack then goes on to say how interest in the occult, there's been a revival in that in recent years. And their first guest tonight is this medium, this spiritualist, and his name is Christou. So they bring this guy out, and he's wearing like this like gold button-up jacket. Like he looks like a mystic or something. And they talk about how Halloween holds special significance, and Christou explains how, yes, Halloween is the time to break open the door to the underworld, and it's the last time that the recently deceased can finish any last-minute business. And, like, masks are used to hide from angry spirits. Like, that's why we do that on Halloween. And Jack asks Christou if he hears voices all the time, and Christou basically compares his mind to a ham radio that picks up frequencies, and when he wants to turn it off, he just, like, kind of lowers the volume. So Christou says that the energy in here is very strong. So at this point, Jack gives him the floor, and Christou closes his eyes, and he starts to say that he's like getting these signals, and he starts to kind of like grunt and groan. And at first it seems like really exaggerated. Like this guy is obviously a fucking kook and like he's just making this up. And it seems like that's true even further when he starts to be like, I'm getting a P. Pete? Peter? Peterson, and like nobody's claiming it, like nobody's saying anything. This means nothing to anybody until somebody shouts from the audience, Peterman, and Christou's like, oh yeah, that's it, right? Like, of course it is. So they go over to this guy, and he starts to talk about how my wife's name was Peters, or my wife's maiden name was Peterman, and Christou is like, oh, she recently passed, like she's in the room with us, and the guy's like, no, she ran off with my neighbor 5 years ago. So like they get some chuckles from the crowd for that, but Christou like changes up, and he's like, well, no, now I'm getting Elizabeth. And everybody's like, the guy says no. He's like, no, that's not her name. So Christou seems kind of frazzled, and he's like, sorry, it passed. Like the signal passed. Sometimes things can get scrambled with like the TV and the cameras and everything. So Jack changes up like a good host, and he starts interacting with the audience when suddenly Christou interrupts him, and he goes to this woman in the audience, and it's these two women sitting next to each other, and he asks them who Edmund is, and they both look kind of shocked. And one of the girls is like, he was my brother, and the lady sitting next to him is their mother. So Edmund's mother and sister are here, and Christou is like, something bad happened to him, didn't he? Like and it's hard to talk about because he took his own life, didn't he? And at this point they start to nod, and they're kind of in shock by this, and they say, yes, he did that 5 years ago. And Christou is like, there was a lot of confusion about it, wasn't there? And they explain like, yes, he left no note, he seemed so happy, we had no idea. And Christou kind of comforts them, and he's like, he wants you to know that he's at peace and is sorry for the suffering that he caused. And I'm also hearing him say the word Papa, and they're kind of confused, or at least the daughter is kind of confused by that. But then the mom starts crying, and she's like, when Edmund was a kid, he had a teddy bear that he called Papa, and I've kept it all these years. Like, I've kept all of his stuff. Like, can you please tell him that Papa is safe? And Christou says to him, I don't need to, because he already knows. And of course they're crying. I'm crying at this point watching this, and the crowd cheers and everything. So Christou's gained the favor of the crowd back. He had a flop, but now he hit it. So Jack starts to go to break. He's like, okay, that's great. Like, let's cut to our first commercial break. But before he can even fully do that, Christou starts to scream, and he starts to grab his head like he's in pain. And he starts saying like, something very intense is here. I'm getting the name Minnie. And nobody's saying anything. And he's like, please, like, somebody claim it. Minnie, who knows a Minnie? And he goes on, and he's like, I'm sensing a lot of sadness, and I'm seeing an unmarried man with a wedding ring. And suddenly Christou's eyes roll to the back of his head and go completely white. So the audience freaks out. Everybody's screaming, and suddenly the lights go out as well. And Christou screaming is like, the spirit needs to talk to you. And eventually the lights come back on, and Christou's eyes are back to normal. So Jack at this point does cut to a commercial break, and as the commercial break is happening, we see those two because the cameras keep rolling, so we see the commercial breaks, and Jack brings Christou over to like the stage where the chairs are, and he sits him down, and Christou just looks unwell, and Gus starts asking somebody else like in the background about, hey, what are the restraints and the knives in the back about? So like, we know we're about to get into some shit, and Christou's nose has started bleeding at this point, and he's coughing, like again, he just looks unwell. And now the crew is all around setting things up, kind of moving around them during the commercial break. And we see Jack go backstage, and he's back there with somebody. And this guy's kind of going to be like the executive. And I think his name is Leo, I'm pretty sure. But Jack seems kind of uneasy about this whole thing, like about what just happened. And Eventually, he goes back to the stage, he gets his makeup fixed, and he tells Christu to pay no mind to Carmichael. He's like, don't worry about this guy. Like, he's just going to do what he's going to do. And the show comes back, and we're going to see exactly what Jack is talking about, because Jack and Christu are now sitting, and they introduce Carmichael Haig, and they explain that this guy used to be a magician, but he's now one of the leading voices of the skeptics movement. And this guy comes out, and he just looks pissed off already. Like, he just looks angry. Like, he doesn't even want to fucking be here. And eventually he like sits down and he does a magic trick. Like, he pulls out this cigar and makes it like appear and disappear like 3 times. So they then start to talk about IFSIP, which is the organization that Carmichael is a part of, and that stands for the International Federation of Scientific Investigation into the Paranormal. And Carmichael explains how it's basically their jobs to test claims of people saying that they have paranormal experiences. And we see like pictures on the screen as he's saying this of him at Amityville, and he's saying like, oh, my friends Ed and Lorraine Warren declined to come with me. Carmichael then goes on to say that until I'm presented with irrefutable proof, I will continue to expose fakers and the liars. And apparently he says that he carries around a check for $100,000 at all times because he will give this to anyone who can prove the existence of the supernatural. And now Carmichael Haig's character is based on this guy named James Randi, because literally exact same thing. So he was a magician turned into like a skeptic and led the skeptics movement. And he apparently also carried around a check for a significant amount of money that he said he would award to whoever gave him irrefutable proof of the supernatural or of the afterlife or whatever. And apparently he carried that thing around for a decade and never gave it to anybody. So Carmichael talks about this, and as this is happening, like, we look at Christu and we see that he is struggling. Like, he's trying to like stifle a cough, you can tell, and eventually it just gets too much and he starts coughing. So he drinks water and he's okay for a minute, and Jack moves on and he asks Carmichael to explain Christu's performance. He's like, how did he just do that? And Carmichael is like, well, he flopped 5 times before he hit on Peterman, which is true. But then Jack brings up Edmund. Like, how would he have known that? And Carmichael's only explanation for this is even a broken clock is right twice a day, which, like, that's not good enough for me, sir. And now Christu like jumps in and starts to try defending himself, and he and Carmichael kind of argue back and forth for a minute, and Carmichael just straight up calls him a liar and a cheat, and this pisses Christu off. Christu gets up and like throws a cup of water in Carmichael's face, and he runs off the stage. But before he's able to get off the stage, they close the doors on him because they don't want him to leave. Like, this is for ratings and this is good TV. So Jack gets up and he's like, all right, I have something to tell everybody. I believe that last reading was meant for me. And Christu asks, who's Minnie? He's like, why don't you say something? Like, who is Minnie? And Jack admits that Minnie was the private nickname that he had for his wife. And Christu starts to like groan suddenly. Like, he again looks unwell and he kind of like keels over like he's in pain and he's groaning, and Carmichael jumps in and he's like, listen, like, he basically thinks it's bullshit, and he makes that very known. And he's like, everybody knew about Madeline's death. Like, don't take the bait. But then suddenly Christu collapses and he starts struggling, and then he starts throwing up black bile everywhere. And he throws up like on Carmichael's jacket. He throws up on the stage, and eventually Jack cuts to commercial, like in a panic. And Christu's wife or whoever, his assistant, whoever it is, rushes over, and he's screaming. He's like, something's not right. She's trying to take care of him. He's on the ground, and eventually they take him into the back. And Jack goes up to Carmichael, who doesn't give a fuck about this man. He's simply just mad about his jacket and how he just got black bile vomited up on his jacket. And he basically accuses Jack for being in cahoots with Christu. He's like, the only way he could have known about Minnie is if you told him, and like, you did that for ratings. And Jack didn't do that. He like insists that he didn't do that, but he's like, okay, whatever. And Carmichael throws a dig at him for being like, I know you're doing this for ratings. I thought your high-powered friends at the Grove could pull some strings. And Jack just says, you overestimate their power. So that executive Leo comes back and he tells Jack that the ambulance is here and we're getting a ton of calls. So like, the switchboard is going crazy. Like, this is good for us. Like, this is good for ratings. So they come back from break and Jack says Christou is okay. He's getting medical attention. And Carmichael jumps in and he's like, oh, what he just did is an old vaudeville routine. Like that's what people used to do with the bodily functions. Like he explains that away immediately. But Jack looks at him and is like, okay, well, keep that check of yours handy because our next guests, and suddenly they're distracted by the sound of an ambulance in the distance, which makes Jack stop for a minute. But then he goes on and he explains that about a month ago, I had a manuscript come across my desk and I read it and I can't stop thinking about it. And he holds up the book and it's called Conversations with the Devil by Dr. June Ross Mitchell. And Jack says that this book will challenge skeptics everywhere. And I want to share a clip from June's research center. And what you're about to see is disturbing and shocking. So they go on and they roll the tape and we see a house and we're hearing June's voice narrate this. And she's explaining how this looks like an ordinary house on an ordinary street, but in reality, it is the headquarters for the First Church of Abraxas. And in through the windows of this house, we can see these cult members in these like red robes and they're conducting this ceremony. And we see this dagger on like a velvet pillow and they're saying like, Hail Abraxas, and there's a pentagram on the table and candles lit everywhere. And they explain how the founder of this cult or of this movement of Abraxas, he believes, they interview him and he's basically saying how he believes that there is no good and no evil, only what we desire and how to attain it, and the master demands sacrifice. And now June's voice comes back and she explains how the FBI started to suspect the cult of kidnapping and other crimes, and there were even stories of children being bred for human sacrifice. And the founder says that whoever witnesses the rituals that they conduct will fall under the influence of the demon Abraxas and do his bidding. And in 1974, agents showed up at the house one day and surrounded it to arrest them pretty much for the illegal activity that they've been doing. And that resulted in a standoff for like over a day until the leader and the founder of this cult and of this movement made everybody douse themselves and him in gasoline, and they all went up and they burned to death. However, there was one survivor, and June explains how there was a 10-year-old girl named Lily and she miraculously survived, and we still don't know if it was on purpose or if she was just lucky. And due to Lily's strange behavior, officials contacted my research center, this is June saying this, and we had an instant connection. So we see like a video of like June with Lily. And then a recording starts to play, and this is from January 1976, and this is the first session between June and Lily. And she starts to ask Lily some questions, but we start to hear this like weird growling noise, and June asks, who am I speaking to? Is this the demon? And suddenly this voice starts screaming, but it doesn't really sound like a little girl's voice. It's like a little girl's voice mixed with like a deep demonic voice, and the recording cuts. So we then jump back to the studio and Jack welcomes in Dr. June Mitchell and Lily. So the two of them come out. June comes out first. Lily follows eventually. And Lily like just immediately is weird. Like she goes right up to the camera, like basically right into it and just like smiles without blinking. And they eventually have to like lead her over to the stage where they're all sitting. So she goes up there. Jack shakes their hands and Lily is kind of just like looking off into the distance like a weirdo. And Jack says, I'm glad you could join us. And Lily says, I'm so glad you can join us too. Which, when she says this, because obviously like Late Night with the Devil, she's the one that's possessed. Like this is where the exorcism is coming into place. I don't think she's talking about me and June. I think she's talking about me and the devil, like me and the entity, this demonic entity within me. So Jack kind of just tries to break the ice at first. He asks Lily if she's ever seen the show, and she says, no, but I know who you are. Your wife died. Like, okay, yeah, what the fuck? And June is kind of embarrassed. She tries to get her to stop, but Lily continues, and she's like, I know what it's like to lose people who are close to you. And June jumps in at this point and is like, Lily has been through more in her 13 years than most people have been in their lifetime. And Lily looks at Jack and says, don't worry about your TV show. I think you'll be very famous soon. So like kind of super fucking cryptic, but Jack is just like, okay, thanks. And he moves on and he's like, we're going to take another break. And Lily kind of just stares blankly into the camera again. So they cut to commercial break and Jack is like, okay, time to make ourselves pretty. Like he's saying this to Lily to try and make her more comfortable. And Lily just looks at him and says, don't I already look pretty, Jack? But her voice does not sound like the little girl's voice that was just coming out of her. I think it's supposed to be Madeline's voice. It's never explained that it is, but I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be Jack's dead wife's voice. So June takes Jack over to the side and she's like, listen, I don't think this is a good idea anymore. She's becoming more and more unpredictable. Like yesterday, she went into one of her fugue states and she started saying your name, like she was reading something. And Jack is kind of, or like she was recalling something. And Jack is kind of trying to play this off. He's like, oh, like she was probably just excited about coming on the show. Like whatever, it's fine. And he eventually convinces June to not back out. And he's like, it seems the two of you like have something really good that we can use on the show. Like, do not back out. And she eventually agrees, though she's hesitant. That guy, Leo, the executive, comes up to Jack and he's like, listen, we just got a call from Sinai and Christu had a hemorrhage in the ambulance and he's dead. And Jack is like, what the actual fuck? He's like, I thought it was all part of the act, like what Carmichael said, like the vaudeville thing. And he's like, okay, we can't say anything to anybody. We don't want to freak anybody out. So don't say anything to anybody, especially Gus, because poor Gus is already freaking out. So we cut back to the studio or like the sound stage and Carmichael is interviewing people in the audience, specifically those two women that are related to Edmund. And they explain like, oh, the woman who helped Christu, so like his wife, assistant, whoever that was, she interviewed us in the lobby before we came in. So Carmichael, of course, is just assuming like, okay, she got the information, gave it to her husband. That's how she knew this. So like debunked right then and there. So Jack goes to sit back down and he's obviously like very uneasy and Lily asks him if everything is okay. And again, this little bitch, like she very much knows that everything is not okay. So the show comes back on. Jack ignores her. The show comes back on. And Jack asks June, because she is a doctor in parapsychology, and he asks like what a parapsychologist is. And the way he asks the question is almost a little condescending. So she gets kind of defensive and she's like, I have a PhD. And Carmichael jumps in and insults her because he's a fucking asshole and he just keeps interrupting her and talking over her. I fucking hate Carmichael. Like he's so annoying. He's so rude. And June eventually is like, can I fucking speak? Which like Carmichael finally shuts the fuck up. And June explains how we believe, like parapsychologists believe, that there are certain phenomena that science simply cannot understand. And Jack brings up, okay, so you believe in like demonic possession and that's what you believe that Lily has. And she calls it something different. She calls it like psychic infestation or whatever she says. And June is like, I've been combining therapy with the understanding of ancient satanic rituals to grasp the understanding of the demon that lurks within her. And Jack asks, is that demon Abraxas? And June says, no, I think it's a less powerful deity that works for Abraxas. So Carmichael jumps in at this point to insult June again because he's been quiet for a minute, which is too damn long for this stupid fucking man that loves to run his mouth. And June snaps back at this stupid motherfucker and like the audience applauds because I think even they're fucking annoyed with him at this point. He just sucks. So Jack decides that at this point he's going to pull out some pieces that he has from June's collection that she's brought in. And one of those pieces is a dagger that was recovered from the burned down house from the cult. And Carmichael takes it and he pretends like there's like a force that's going to stab him with it. Like he's just being such a fucking brat. And I hate him and he gets what's coming to him is all I have to say. But he laughs and he's like, Abraxas is a showman. Like he craves an audience. His name is literally derivative of abracadabra. Like that's his whole thing. So Abraxas, by the way, he wasn't originally a demon, but he was later interpreted as a demon as like history and lore went on. And he is portrayed, reading this directly from Google, he is portrayed as a powerful lord of magic, secrets, and talismans in various role-playing games. He is often depicted as a monstrous being with a rooster's head, human torso, and legs that are either snakes or vipers. And his demonic form is often associated with powers related to magic, secrets, and the mind. He can sometimes be described as having a whip that can steal thoughts or spells, and a shield that can attack enemies. And the whole role-playing game thing comes because apparently he's a character in like Dungeons and Dragons and other games like that. So that's why Carmichael says like he's the showman and his name is derivative of abracadabra, because this is kind of what he is. And we get a little bit more information right now about him and exactly how he affects Lily's mind, because Jack goes on to ask Lily, like, you have a nickname for him, don't you? Like the thing that's living inside of you. Because even though June said like she doesn't think it's Abraxas in there, I do think it's Abraxas in there. Like I think that was the whole point of why Lily survived, is because this cult that worshipped Abraxas like all killed themselves because they knew that they were going down, and they like performed like a ritual or some sort of sacrifice that like allowed this demon that they worship to dwell in Lily, and that's why she's the only person that survived. But anyway, Lily goes on to explain that she calls this thing that's inside of her Mr. Wriggles because he wriggles his way inside my head and then out of it again. And Jack is like, but with June's help, you can control it. And Lily just looks at him, and this is again super cryptic. She's like, we all have a demon within us. We can't always control them, can we? So Jack doesn't even have a second to respond because suddenly this like creepy instrument that Gus had played with earlier starts to play, but it's playing on its own. And he tries to fix it and he like gets electrocuted, like he gets zapped by it, and everything starts to rumble in the studio and like glass starts to shatter everywhere, and everybody is panicking with the exception of Lily. Like, she is very calm. And eventually Carmichael gets up and he goes and unplugs the instrument so it stops. And he like logically explains it away again. He's like, oh, the frequencies and this, but whatever the fuck he's saying. He's stupid. And Lily tells him, like, and tells everybody it was Mr. Wriggles. And he again, like, gives her an attitude and says some dumb shit. And she finally calls him out like somebody does. And she asks him, why are you so condescending? And he doesn't even have a second to answer because Jack chimes in and he's like, is Mr. Wriggles here? And Lily says yes. And Jack asks, can we invite him on the show? And June is upset by this. She immediately like refuses. And she's like, summoning requires a carefully controlled environment. Like, this is not it. And they all start to try to convince her. And like even the audience starts to try to convince her because Jack is like, don't you want to see it? So now June, not really knowing what to do, eventually agrees hesitantly. You can tell that she doesn't want to, but she's like, I agree as long as I have the full cooperation of everyone, especially Carmichael. Like, fuck you. So it's going to happen. And Jack says to everybody, we're going to cut to commercial break and stay tuned as we attempt to communicate with the devil, but not before a word from our sponsors, which is just an utterly hilarious time to fucking drop that lore. So they cut to commercial break and June's pissed off because she feels like Jack ambushed her, and Gus goes to Jack and pulls him aside, and June asks someone to like get the restraints from backstage. So that's why there was restraints here. And Gus is saying to Jack, he's like trying to convince him out of doing this. He's like, you're meddling with things you don't understand. And they argue back and forth for a minute, and Jack is like, I'm just trying to save our show. Like, what else am I supposed to do? And Gus is like, listen, I know about Christu. So he knows that Christu died. And he's like, it's that Mr. Wriggles and I'm scared. And like some of the crew want to jump ship, and like myself included. And Jackie's like, absolutely fucking not. Like, keep that to yourself. No one's going anywhere. And Gus again is like, I'm begging you to stop. But then Leo interrupts. So Jack just walks away. He doesn't listen to Gus. But eventually the show comes back on and we see Jack whisper something to June. And Jack steps into the spotlight. Like, this moment is so dramatic. And he's like, without further ado, Dr. June will commence the demonstration. Godspeed. And he steps out of frame, and behind him we see Lily restrained to a chair. So she has these two like things on her wrists that are restraining her to this chair, and she's sitting across from June. And June tells everybody in the audience and at home, she says, this entity can manifest in many ways, and its entry into this world is only possible through Lily. So whatever you might see or hear, remain calm, because Lily's focus must remain with me. And Lily is smiling and looking at her this whole time, like she is ready to fucking go. And we see June has Lily look at her, and she tells her to close her eyes, and she does, and she seemingly puts Lily to sleep within a couple minutes. And then she starts to ask, may I speak to Mr. Wriggles? And at first there's no answer and it's just silent until suddenly the chair starts to rock back and forth kind of violently. And Lily starts to grunt and kind of struggle against the restraints. And eventually June asks her, who is present? Let yourself be known. And from Lily starts to come this demonic laughter. And this demonic voice comes out of her. So it's like her voice, like this little girl's voice, combined with this deep demonic man raspy voice, which is like almost even creepier than it just being demonic, because that's showing me that it's the two of you in there. And this voice looks at June and says, you know who I am, doctor. And when she looks up, her face is like not the same. It's very much giving Reagan from The Exorcist, in that like one of her eyes is like yellow and she suddenly has this like scratch down her face and her skin is pale. So it's not like as extreme as Reagan in The Exorcist, but like that's kind of the energy that it's going towards. So she looks up, face all distorted, and she looks at the audience, who is terrified, and she gasps. And this demon voice is like, who are these people? Where am I? And she like starts to panic, and June tries to calm her down and is like, we brought you here to better understand your purpose. And the demon says, he's here, isn't he? And he doesn't even turn at first. He doesn't turn at first. He does eventually, but he says, good to see you, Jack. And then turns and looks directly at Jack Delroy in the fucking eye. So Jack seems kind of confused, and the demon goes on to be like, oh, we go way back. We met amongst the tall trees, remember? And June tries to get the demon's attention back to her. And the demon looks at June, and we can tell from earlier that June and Jack kind of have something, like the way that he kind of like approached her and got really close. And at this point, the demon calls that out because he looks at June and he's like, you know what happened to his last whore, talking about Jack's wife. She died an ugly death, and the worms have finished her off by now. So you can screw whoever you want, Jack, just like June here. And June gets upset by this. And I think she like slaps the demon in the face or something and tells Lily like, come back to me now. And Lily taunts her. And the more she taunts her, June eventually does slap her in the face. And when she does that, Lily's head kind of falls and she starts to cry. And she's like, why would you hurt me, June? And June goes towards her thinking this is Lily, but then suddenly the head shoots up on this demon and it's not Lily. It's still the demon. And June pulls out this necklace that she's wearing and she starts reciting something in Latin, and the demon kind of like taunts her as she's doing this. Like it starts laughing and reciting these verses with her, and eventually Lily's nose starts to bleed and she turns to Jack and she says, how could you let it happen? And now at this point, electricity starts flying through the studio, like flying through all the lights, and Lily's chair starts to levitate. And eventually Lily is like up in the air and everybody's kind of just watching in stunned silence until Lily screams, and that causes her to fall back to the ground. And we look at her and we see that Lily is back to normal. So the demon has left, and June goes up to her and is like, I'm so sorry, like I shouldn't have done this to you. And she comforts her and she hugs her. And we cut back to Jack, who is just stunned, and he's like, have you ever seen anything like that? Like talking to his audience. And Carmichael jumps in. Of course he does. He always has something to fucking say because he's a dumb man. And he's like, I want to point out a number of tricks. I want you to get fucking punched in the face, you dumb bitch. And even Jack, you can tell, is feeling the same way because he's like, yeah, you'll get your time. And he like kind of cuts him off and he goes to commercial. So they cut to commercial and Carmichael is like kind of talking to himself or to whoever will fucking listen, which is nobody because nobody fucking likes him. But he's like, is this a talk show or a freak show? Good one, you dumbass. So Jack goes over to check on Lily and he gets the cameraman to like undo the straps on her. And as he's doing that, Jack goes over to June and he says he wants them to have a regular spot on the show. He's like, this is great. Like we can do this all the time. And June is just really like clearly disturbed by this whole thing. And she asks Jack, what did she mean by the tall trees? And Jack just says, I don't know. But you can tell he's kind of playing dumb at this point. And behind them, Lily kind of sounds like she's in pain, like she's struggling. So they go over to her and Jack takes that dagger that is part of June's collection and uses it to cut the restraints. And June comforts her as this is happening. And now Gus is completely freaked out. And Leo tells him, like, calm down, do your job. Like nobody's listening to poor Gus. And eventually Gus goes to Carmichael and he's like, the show should have been cut after Christu died. And Carmichael is like, oh, you mean after he like faked that whole thing? And Gus is like, no, he died on the way to the hospital. And Carmichael is shocked by this. He didn't know that Christu died. So Jack goes backstage where he runs into Leo, who tells him that 3 crew just walked off and communications called and they want an emergency meeting at 7 a.m. tomorrow because they think that this is the biggest TV moment since the moon landing. So like, this is good. Like our ratings are fucking through the roof. They both celebrate. They're super excited. This is so happy. But then Jack is a little bit freaked out and he wonders how the girl's voice sounded like that because at one point, like it sounded like the demon, but at one point towards the end, he's like, it sounded just like Minnie. And Leo is like, listen, like don't get spooked. Like you're just thinking that you heard that, like it's all in your head, and like Minnie would want you to get out there and do this. So Jack takes that advice and he agrees, and he goes back to the stage and he puts the dagger on the table and the show comes back. And Jack apologizes to anybody who might have been offended by what they just saw. And he asks Lily to tell everybody that she's okay, and she says that she is. And he asks if she has any recollection of what just happened. And she says it's like she's asleep but awake at the same time. And she just tries to focus on June's voice, and I'm sorry if Wriggles said anything rude. So then, of course, Carmichael is shaking internally because he hasn't spoken or been a dick in like probably 30 seconds. So he's struggling for it to come out. And it does. And he's like, he interrupts and he's like, my concern is the sanity of this young girl. And June is upset by this because she's like, I became her guardian and like she lived in awful conditions and I gave her love and compassion. Like she is my family. Like I love this girl. And Carmichael is like, there is no demon. She's been hypnotized and manipulated. And Jack jumps in and he's like, well, how do you explain the physical transformation? Like she levitated. And Carmichael agrees. He's like, yeah, like the stagecraft was impeccable. I'll give it to them. But he still doesn't believe this at all. And Jack finally fucking calls this guy out. He's like, listen, you're a cold-hearted person who just doesn't want to part with $500,000. Because earlier in the show, Carmichael had changed the check from $100,000 to $500,000 because he so believes that nothing supernatural exists. And Jack calls him out. He's like, you just don't want to part with that money, so you're never going to accept the fact that anything is proof. And Carmichael is like, okay, well, I'll prove it right now. And he asks for a volunteer. And before anybody can volunteer, he just looks at Gus and he's like, come on. And Gus obviously wants nothing to do with this, but Jack tells him to go. So Gus listens. And Carmichael and Gus sit across from each other. So they sit in those two chairs that Lily and June were just in. And Carmichael tells everybody, like the audience, the people at home, he's like, I need everybody to be as relaxed as they can possibly be. And he pulls out a pocket watch and it starts ticking and he runs his hand over it and it turns to like this black and white swirl, like a hypnosis swirl pretty much. And he holds it up and he asks everyone to stare into the watch, including Jack. So Jack is watching on the monitor. And suddenly Carmichael clicks a button and there's a flash of light. And Carmichael asks Gus about his fear of worms. And Gus is like, how did you know that? And they go on to talk about how these worms are like grotesque and they thrive where it's dark and moist. And Carmichael asks Gus, do you realize you're now in a deep trance? And Gus is like, no, I'm not. And he kind of laughs it off. And Carmichael tells him, when I click my fingers, you'll be under my command. And he snaps his fingers and he starts to talk to Gus, who clearly is very much in a trance. Like when he snapped his fingers, he went like trance, like his eyes kind of glazed over. And Carmichael asks Gus if he feels any different, and Gus clearly starts to hear something because he's kind of looking off and he's like, do you hear that? So he's hearing something that the rest of us can't hear. And Carmichael says nothing. And Gus starts to get like visibly uncomfortable. Like he takes off his jacket. He mentions how it's hot. And then he starts to mention how like his skin is itchy and he's kind of pulling at his shirt. And eventually he starts to like unbutton his shirt. And Carmichael points out that Gus's neck is bleeding. And Gus turns and it's not like just a nick or anything. There is like a gaping hole in the side of his neck, and he goes to touch it, and suddenly he starts to pull out a worm, and he pulls out multiple worms, like they're just coming one after the other, and Gus starts to panic, and eventually he rips his shirt open, and he goes to his stomach like this, and he starts to rip open the skin of his stomach, and out of him is falling like hundreds and hundreds of worms. And this scene is so great because you can tell this is all done using practical effects, and it is chef's fucking kiss. So as this is happening, the audience is watching and they're all screaming, they're gasping, they're panicking, and Carmichael like goes to snap him out of it and nothing happens. And Carmichael starts to panic. He's like, oh no, this wasn't supposed to happen. And Lily is on the stage laughing. Like this sick bitch is fucking laughing. And Carmichael is like, this wasn't meant to happen. And then suddenly a giant worm bursts out of Gus's eye, seemingly killing him. But then Carmichael goes, dreamer here, awake. And suddenly Gus is fine. And he's standing exactly where he just was, but just with his shirt unbuttoned, body completely put together, no worms in his stomach, no worms in his fucking neck, no worm through his eye. And he's confused. And Carmichael is like, how do you feel, Gus? And Gus is like, fine, but when do we begin? And he looks down and sees that his shirt is unbuttoned. And he's like, what the hell? So he like panics and he turns around and he buttons up his shirt. And Jack is confused. He's like, there were just worms all over you. And Gus is like, oh, I hope not. I fucking hate worms. So they all are looking at Carmichael for an explanation because they're like, what the fuck is this sorcery? Like, what is going on? And Carmichael is basically like, I just did with what June did, but with a little bit more imagination. And Jack is shocked by this. He's like, so you just hypnotized all of us? And Carmichael says, yeah, you're all just a very suggestible lot. So like, it was pretty easy. So Jack asks them to play back the last bit of video. And he's like, well, if Carmichael is right, then this is going to be interesting. And sure enough, they play back the video and we see exactly what we just saw. But Gus is sitting with Carmichael, and Carmichael instead is telling him what he's going to see. So he's like, you hear a ghostly moaning. You're hot. You're itchy. You feel something crawling under your skin and your neck is bleeding and there's worms coming out of your stomach. And Jack is watching this and he's like, this is not how I remember it. And Gus is embarrassed by this. And eventually Jack asks the audience, like, is there anybody who didn't see the worms? And a couple people do raise their hands. So there were a couple people that weren't susceptible to the hypnotization, if that's a word, I don't know. But ultimately, Jack gives credit to Carmichael. He's like, damn, okay, like, that was pretty damn good. Like, you got me there. But then June chimes in and she's like, listen, I didn't hypnotize Lily or the audience. And Carmichael is still absolutely convinced that she did, and this is just a crock of shit. And Lily suggests, she chimes in and she's like, well, if you think that I was hypnotized or that everybody was hypnotized, why don't we look back at that part of the show too? And everybody's like, oh, that's smart. Cameras don't lie. So June at first doesn't want to, but Jack like accepts this for a second and he's like, oh, Cleo James is standing by to take us out. Like the show is supposed to end, but then he's like, maybe we should bring her back later. Like we can't leave everybody hanging. And June gets up. She's pissed at this point and she's like, we're leaving. And she tries to get Lily to go with her, but Lily stops her and is like, we want everybody to know the truth, don't we? Like, let's just do this. So eventually she pulls June back and Jack plays back the video, but this time everything's the same. So June indeed did not hypnotize anybody. Like it's all exactly the same. The levitating, the distorted face, and Carmichael is still like, there must be a rational explanation. Like I want to take these tapes for forensic examination. How about you shove them up your stupid fucking ass, you dumb bitch? Oh my God, he's so fucking annoying. Like, honestly, one of the most annoying characters ever. Like, he's such a little brat. Like, I just can't stand him. But the video continues to play, but suddenly Jack notices this static this time, and he asks them to play it in slow-mo and then frame by frame, and eventually he pauses on this frame where, sure enough, you can see a ghostly apparition of his wife standing behind him, and he is utterly shocked by this. And Carmichael takes this as his opportunity to be like, I knew you set this all up. Like he's saying this to Jack in front of his audience and everybody's like, you set this all up. Like this was all you. You thought an appearance from Madeline would save this. Like you conspire with Christu. Like he's just going on. And like this man just deserves to be punched in the fucking face. Now, this is not the first time that we can see a ghostly apparition of Madeline. I've actually never seen any myself, but if you look it up, there are multiple times where she appears throughout the movie. So it's like very quick. I've like seen pictures of it. Like I never actually like watched the movie and caught apparitions of her at other times. But like at one point you can see her in a mirror. At one point you can see her like behind Gus when they're backstage. So there's a lot of different moments where you see Madeline in this movie before we all know that Madeline is actually there. So she's kind of been there the whole time. So Jack is sitting there in disbelief, just shocked. And Carmichael is yelling like the little bitch boy that he is. And then suddenly static starts to run through Lily. Like Lily she's sitting there and she's crying at first. And it looks like you can hear like the zapping of electricity running through her. And you can tell that it's starting to like run through her back. And Jack looks at her and goes to touch her. And he actually gets shocked. Like he like pulls his hand back like he was just shocked. And then suddenly all the lights go out and everybody's looking around for a second and the lights come back on. And when they do, Lily is standing up and she is like, there's electricity like shooting out of her arms. Like we can see these like blue rays of electricity just shooting out of her arms, and like wind starts blowing all around them in the studio and everything around her is just like electricity. And eventually this like splits Lily's head wide open and this electricity just starts coming out of her like she's clearly possessed or fucking, I don't know how you could even explain this, but Gus stands up and he holds out a crucifix and Lily looks in his direction and he's like, the power of Christ compels you. And she simply just looks at him and his head snaps all the way around and he dies. He drops dead on the stage. And now June gets up and she holds up that necklace that she had worn earlier, and Lily simply turns her attention to her, and this causes June to levitate by the necklace like she's being hanged by it, and she's struggling, she's getting strangled, and then Jack goes to help, but Lily throws him down, and Carmichael at this point, this is finally what makes this motherfucker believe, because he gets down on his knees and he starts fucking praying. Like, he starts praying for his goddamn life. And we see Lily look back at June, and her throat is just slit by an unseen force. We see June struggling. You think that she's going to choke, but then suddenly her throat is just slit and she drops dead as well. So then Carmichael, he decides he's going to pull out this check. He's like, here, like, you got it. Like, he's giving this to the fucking demon as if that's going to do anything. And the demon just looks at him and says, abracadabra. And the check like burns and disappears. And then Carmichael spontaneously starts to burn as well. And he burns to death. And he finally fucking dies. Honestly, like, this is the one guy that I'm like, he got his. Like, I'm not saying he deserved it, but fuck this guy. So Jack is in the corner watching this, absolutely fucking horrified, and Leo tries to pull him backstage, and he like stops to look at Lily, and he eventually runs backstage, and the camera zooms in on her and then cuts to static, and we get a title card that says Station Difficulties with this like kind of elevator music playing in the background. And we then cut to Gus, and he's introducing Jack, and the door opens and Jack's back is to the audience, and he turns around and he looks confused as fuck, and he's like, how did I get here? And now the audience is all laughing, and from Jack's POV, like, we can see that the audience is all dark silhouettes. Like, we can't really see any of their features, which makes it super creepy, and they're all laughing, and then suddenly everybody goes silent at the same time, and they all just look at him. So we then start to kind of go through a bunch of Jack's episodes, and he's put back in his own position and kind of like forced to watch himself and his evolution on these episodes throughout the years. So like there's one where he's dressed as a caveman, and he's like, he literally looks around and he's like, what the fuck is going on? And like there's another one where a woman pulls out a giant worm, and then he's in the one where his wife is in the wheelchair and he's sitting there looking at her horrified, and he's like, you're dead. And we cut back to the Station Difficulties card, but then the music distorts and the picture starts to kind of melt. And we cut back to the show again. And this time Gus has this old woman spinning a wheel, but it's that black and white swirl that we had seen, like the hypnosis swirl. And Jack is there, and he looks directly into the camera, and he's like, turn off your televisions. And he starts to yell at everybody. He's like, turn them off, like, don't watch. And this like upbeat music is playing in the background as the audience laughs and like seemingly is completely unaware of what Jack is doing or what Jack is saying. And then we get these flashes of like random images. And eventually we cut to Jack signing that contract with that old guy, like the TV executive, the channel owner or whatever. And he looks at Jack and he says, welcome to the family, Jack. And somebody in the audience asks, what did you have to sacrifice to get here, Jack? And that old man looks at him and says, oh, Jack's greatest sacrifice is yet to come. And we see two hooded figures come up to Jack, and they take him and they hand him a chalice and they lead him somewhere. And now they're leading him onto the soundstage, but now there's all these like tall redwood trees on the stage, and he's like kind of surrounded by them. And one of the hooded figures comes up to him and is like, great show today. And we see there's a bunch of people now behind them, including a giant owl, which again, like the owl is like kind of the mascot of Bohemian Grove. So that's obviously intentional. They turn to this owl, and he's kind of got his arms outstretched. So the guys lead him over to this owl, and they put Jack down on his knees in front of it and tell him to drink. So he starts drinking whatever is in this chalice, and everybody goes silent. And then the camera turns, and we see that Jack is now kneeling in front of a door, like the studio door. And the studio door opens, and we see that it's his wife, Madeline, and she is laying in bed, and she is sick. She's bald. She's got like, again, the oxygen mask on. Like, she's not well. And Jack is just in shock, and he goes over and he sits with her, and he is absolutely fucking horrified. And Madeline says to him, they told you you could have it all, didn't they? Like, talking about this, the Grove, like the members of the Grove, which we now know is very dark. And she says, you finally made it, but you had to pay a price. Exit Minnie, stage left. So now we're understanding that the reason that this non-smoker randomly got lung cancer is because this was the sacrifice that Jack had to make to gain his fame. And Jack looks out at the audience, and he's just, the audience is watching, by the way. Like, we see these dark silhouettes, like still just like watching, like nothing's wrong. And she says to him, Minnie says to him, your soul belonged to them, and it still does. And Jack cries at this point, and he's like, it wasn't supposed to turn out this way. And she says to him, you're on your own now, Jack. And he like starts crying, and he tells her that he loves her. And she just says, if you love me, then do one last thing for me. And she looks down, and he looks where she's looking, and they're looking at that dagger, the one that came came from the house, and she begs him. She's like, you know what to do. Like, please just do this. And Jack cries, and he picks up this dagger, and he holds Minnie. And after a minute or two, he stabs her in the chest. So he stabs his wife in the chest, and then he looks down and he screams when he realizes that he did not just stab his wife, he just stabbed Lily. So he's back on the soundstage during the special. Everybody else around him is dead. Everything is quiet, and he just killed this girl. And Jack stands up horrified, and he starts saying, "Dreamer, here, awake," because he thinks that's going to snap him out of it, but it doesn't. And he keeps repeating that multiple times as we zoom out and we just see like all the carnage and all the dead bodies, and we hear sirens in the distance, and we cut to black, and the movie ends. So, Late Night with the Devil. I honestly love that they made a movie kind of based on the Grove, like based on the lore of the Grove, because that is something that like honestly does kind of scare me, because what the fuck goes on at that? I try not to think too much about it or talk about it too much because I don't want to be involved. I don't want anything to do with it. But the interesting part about this is that it's said just in folklore and lore in general, in the Bible, whatever you want to call it. Like, it's said that if you make a deal with the devil for earthly goods, like for success, for wealth, whatever, he takes his payment after 7 years. So earlier when we had seen Jack at the Grove, he initially went to the Grove for the first time in 1969. You can see like there's a year on it. And that means that 7 years later would have been 1976, which is when his wife died. So that was kind of a hint from the beginning that the price that he had to pay was his wife dying. So I don't think, I always go back and forth about this because I don't think Jack intentionally knew that his wife was going to die when he got involved with the Grove, but I think he knew that it was very much a possibility and he decided to do it anyway. And was it worth it? Was it worth it, Jack? And it's just interesting to me because, like, you still never beat Carson. Like, yeah, you're famous and you have all these nominations, but you still never fucking beat Carson. And, like, maybe you finally did today. I don't know. I wonder what the aftermath of this was. And I go back to when Lily says, like, oh, I think you're going to be very famous very soon. And that's probably because I don't imagine he got away with this. Like, I don't imagine he just walked out and went back to being a talk show host like everything was fine. Like, he did kill this girl, even though she was a demon and killed everybody else. So, I don't know. I wonder. But I think that's one that's open to interpretation. Like, you can fill in the blanks here and kind of decide what you think happened to Jack. Like, do you want a happy ending for him? Like, do you want him to go on and beat Carson and stuff? Or do you want an unhappy ending where he gets thrown in jail or whatever for basically being responsible for everybody dying? I don't know. Up to you. But that was Late Night with the Devil. Again, I think that was a perfect movie to end Halloween on because it all takes place on Halloween night. And I have a lot of fun with that. I really love like the 70s vibe of it. And like, I just think like the 70s talk show was like such a good backdrop for a horror movie. So like, I'm a huge fan of it, mainly for that reason. I think David Dastmalchian is wonderful. I think all the performances are really good. Like Carmichael, like really made me hate him in a short span of time. So like everybody did very well here. So Halloween month has come to an end, sadly, until next year. But I have a very exciting lineup, I think, for next month. I asked for suggestions on my Instagram of what the theme of this month could be, and shout out to Raina Alyssa Photography because you had the winning one because I love this because they suggested that I do Friendsgiving. So basically like movies where friends have to survive something or like friendship betrayals where one person is the killer. And I think that is such a great idea, especially as somebody who does have Friendsgivings every single year. I have an annual Friendsgiving every year. So I love this idea. So here's the lineup. So we are going to start off Friendsgiving month with The Descent 1 and 2. I've been dying to talk about this movie, like mainly the first one. I will talk about the second one too, even though I don't think it should exist, but I will talk about it. But we're going to talk about The Descent 1 and 2, and I'm so fucking excited for that just right off the rip. And then on Friday, we're going to talk about Host, which I think Host is like a modern day masterpiece and it's so fucking good. And it came out during COVID, which made it even scarier. So we'll talk about Host. And then on Wednesday, we're going to talk about Bodies, 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 which I think is just such an absolute blast. It's so silly. It's so fun. I love the plot twist at the end. And then Friday, we're going to do Truth or Dare. The one with Lucy Hale, I think this movie gets a lot of hate. I actually really enjoy it. So like I'm kind of excited to cover that one. And then we are covering a franchise that has been very highly requested. We're doing the Final Destination franchise this month, guys. So we're going to do the first episode of that on Wednesday the 19th. So that'll be the first 3 movies. And then I'll do the second part the following Wednesday, the next 3 movies. And then the Friday in between that, we're going to do Cabin in the Woods because I fucking love Cabin in the Woods. And then we're going to end the month with another very highly requested one, Stay Alive. So all these movies are about like groups of friends that need to survive the night pretty much. So that's the theme. So again, I love that theme so much. I think this is going to be so fun. I think we have a really good lineup. So I'm excited to get into that. If you guys haven't yet given me a 5-star rating on Apple, Spotify, wherever you're listening to me, it would be super helpful, helps push me out into the algorithm and find other people to join our lovely little growing community we have here. So until Wednesday, you guys know where to find me. It's horror_chronicles on TikTok and Instagram. I post every day so you can keep up with me there. And until next time, watch more horror movies and stay spooky, my friends.